Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson. Today we're listening to cold cases that has been finally solved in 2022.
Born on April 27, 1956, to parents Doyle and Vanetta Matthews, Mary Robin Matthews, who went by Robin, grew up in a religious home in Kingman, Kansas, alongside her two sisters, Danetta and Monica. Robin's childhood was spent in an idealistic home. Her parents doted on their three children and always tried to provide the best possible life for them. Robin was an easygoing and happy-go-lucky girl who cherished the company of her family and friends. Those who were close to Robin described her as a person who was beautiful both inside and out. The carefree Robin fell in love at a very young age when she met Douglas Walker, who went by Doug. Doug, who also grew up in the Kingman area, was 1 year older than Robin and felt the same way about her. After getting married in 1974, Robin formally became Mary Robin Walter. The newly married couple started their new chapter in life on a high note. Shortly after the wedding, Robin became pregnant with her only daughter, Pamela. While they were still young, both Doug and Robin decided to focus on their career. The couple moved to Great Bend, Kansas, a city of about 15,000 residents in central Kansas. They settled into a mobile home in Nelson Trailer Park, located near the Great Bend Municipal Airport in the rural area of Great Bend. Initially, Doug intended to pursue a career in insurance, but eventually abandoned the idea and went to work at his uncle's service station. Meanwhile, Robin decided to pursue nursing, solely due to her longing to help people. She enrolled herself in Barton County Community College and Great Bend College, while also taking up a part-time job at the Great Bend Manor Hospital. Doug was extremely supportive of her studies and careers, as much as he was dedicated to his own field of work. After some initial struggles, Robin and Doug were able to manage their daily schedule quite comfortably. By 1980, 4 years after moving to Great Bend, the couple was enjoying a good life. They put their time and effort into raising their daughter, while also excelling in their respective workplaces. Robin was in her second semester of college by this point, and relished being a mother. However, Robin's blissful life was about to come to a tragic end. January 24th, 1980 started as a regular winter morning for the Walter family when Doug left home for work. Robin was supposed to attend her afternoon nursing class at 1 p.m., but she did not make it there, which was extremely unusual for her. The circumstances got stranger when Robin did not pick up their daughter, the then 5-year-old Pamela, from the babysitter's house at 3 p.m. as per the scheduled appointment. Doug, on the other hand, unaware of anything amiss at home, went to a club with friends after leaving the service station where he worked. The reason for Robin's absence, both at her classes and at the babysitter's house, would not be revealed until 6:40 p.m. that evening, when Doug returned home along with one of his friends. Upon entering the house, both men walked into a scene straight out of a horror movie. 23-year-old Robin was lying motionless on the bed, face up in a pool of her own blood. Devastated and heartbroken, Doug immediately called 911 while still numb from the shock of what had happened. It did not take long for the officers from the Barton County Sheriff's Office to arrive at the home. While the body was sent to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy, the officers began combing the house for clues. Inside the home, they found the murder weapon, a .22 caliber pistol which belonged to the Walters. It was concluded that the gun was loaded and emptied twice during the shooting. The autopsy report revealed that Robin had been shot 12 times in her neck, chest, abdomen, and arm. This was an extremely baffling case for the investigators. They were puzzled by the apparent lack of motive for the murder, as there was neither evidence of sexual assault nor robbery in the home. Additionally, when Doug was questioned by police regarding his assumptions about the person responsible for his wife's death, he could not come up with an answer. He was unable to think of anyone who would want to harm Robin. However, he said that they never locked their doors and always left the keys in the car, as their neighborhood was generally considered pretty safe. Investigators interviewed several people in the neighborhood, but learned nothing of value regarding the killer's identity. Eventually, detectives zeroed in on a person of interest, but could not make an arrest due to the lack of evidence. It's unknown why this man became a person of interest. At the time, they did not publicly name the suspect. With nothing tangible to connect the man to the murder, the case lay dormant for over 40 years. In April 2022, more than 4 decades later, while recovering from COVID, Detective Sergeant Adam Hales from the Barton County Sheriff's Office reopened the cold case. For days, he studied the case documents before a major clue caught his attention. Among thousands of documents, Detective Hales came across some incriminating information, some of which had been overlooked in the original investigation, and some of which was added at a later date. Investigators never publicly revealed what the evidence exactly was. After reviewing the evidence, Hales gathered together a team of detectives to join him on the case. The team started interviewing multiple witnesses across the country who were involved in the original investigation. The Kansas Bureau of Investigation also assisted in the investigation. After months of hefty investigative work, investigators were able to successfully build a case based on the newfound evidence. In October 2022, detectives submitted the case to the attorney of Martin County Courthouse for review. After approximately 4 weeks of review, an arrest warrant was obtained for the suspect, who was finally identified as Robert Hanks. He was then formally charged with murder in the second degree. Robert Hanks lived in the same neighborhood as the Walter family at the time of Robin's murder. It's not known why Hanks became a person of interest in the first place, but his long criminal history might be one of the reasons. Just a year after Robin's murder, Hanks was arrested and charged with sexual assault, aggravated battery, aggravated robbery, and aggravated burglary. He was convicted in 1983 and served about 8 years, but was paroled in 1993. Detectives concluded that Hanks, who was 25 at the time of Robin's slaying, broke into the Walter home and gunned down Robin on that fateful evening in 1980. However, his motive for the murder and whether he knew Robin beforehand is still unclear. On December 8, 2022, Barton police arrested now 68-year-old Robert Hanks from Oxford, Kansas. The outcome is bittersweet for Robin's daughter, Pamela Walter Cooper, who still suffers from nightmares about her mother's horrific death. While she's happy that the alleged culprit has now been put away, she also regrets that many of her family members did not live to see this day. Robin's mother passed away in 2012, and her father soon followed in 2015. Doug passed away just a year earlier in 2021. Pamela also told the media that the family had always suspected Hanks of Robin's murder, even though he was never publicly named until last year. She further expressed that she's curious to know if he's remorseful for his actions. However, even if that's not the case, she stated that she personally has forgiven him a long time ago. This case stands as the oldest homicide in Kansas history, which ended with an arrest. Currently, Banks is being held in the Barton County Jail on a $500,000 bond. On June 1, 2018, an off-duty firefighter, Chris Lemieux, was out on his boat bait fishing with 2 of his buddies in the ocean, just north of the Boynton Beach Inlet in Palm Beach County, Florida. The boat was about 50 yards from the beach when they noticed a baby's body floating face down in the water. Lemieux quickly realized that it was a potential crime scene, so he did not attempt to touch the body. Instead, he called 911 and waited for authorities to arrive. Upon arriving, the deputies from the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office discovered that the body belonged to a healthy, full-term female child who was deemed to be under 14 days old. The drift study later determined that the girl had been in the water for a day or two, and her death was ruled a homicide. Despite no obvious signs of trauma on the body, the autopsy results suggested that the cause of death was suffocation. The report also suggested that the baby was seemingly born in a hospital, since her umbilical cord was clipped and there was evidence of a needle mark on her foot. Initially, detectives thought that the baby might have been of Caribbean descent due to the DNA tests defining her as being a 50-50 mix of African and Asian. Based on their theory, the local authorities contacted the Bahamas law enforcement, but did not find any suspicious missing baby cases. It was also concluded that the baby most likely did not come from a boat carrying migrants. Surprisingly, they did not disclose what landed them to this conclusion. At this point, detectives working on the case were handed the daunting task of identifying the infant. To whom did the child belong? Who disposed of this poor baby like a piece of garbage? Detectives combed through 22 tips and searched more than 700 baby records from Broward and Palm Beach counties, but could not find a suitable match. Detectives urged the public for assistance, while a $10,000 reward was posted for anyone having significant evidence. However, this did not lead to any substantial leads. The baby's DNA was submitted to the CODIS, but no likely match was produced. As days passed, the baby remained unclaimed and unidentified. The child would eventually become known as Baby June. Despite investigators' best efforts to locate the baby's parents, the case went cold just a few days after the discovery. It wasn't until 4 years later, in 2022, that authorities finally caught a break in the case. In June 2022, the case was taken over by the Cold Case Unit of the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, led by Detective Brittany Christoffel. They sent Baby June's DNA to Parabon Nanolab, where it was entered into a public genealogy database. Luckily, a match came back to Baby June's first cousin once removed. From there, the investigators reverse engineered the family tree and eventually tracked down the potential father of Baby June. The man, whose identity was never publicly revealed, was cooperative with investigators when they contacted him. After he was confirmed as Baby June's father by further DNA testing, he stated that he had no knowledge of the baby ever being born. However, the man pointed authorities to his ex-girlfriend, Arya Singh. The father told the detectives that he met Arya at Santa Lucia's High School in Lantana, where they both attended. They stayed together until September or October 2017. In May 2018, he said he moved to Tallahassee for work. Around the same time, he said his conversations with Arya again began over the phone. In August or September of 2018, he went to West Palm Beach to attend a concert with her. That's when Arya told him that she'd been pregnant during the summer of 2018, but took care of it. He said he did not understand her statement, but assumed that she had an abortion. For days after the incident, he said he tried asking her about the baby, but she refused to speak about it, and eventually he dropped the matter. Concluding that the father had nothing to do with Baby June's death, the detectives began closing in on 29-year-old Arya Singh in late July of 2022. After days of surveying, on August 14, 2022, detectives obtained DNA from a discarded coffee cup. The DNA on its rim confirmed that Arya was indeed the mother of Baby June. Detectives then obtained a warrant to search through Arya's location data on her cell phone. This placed her right at the lifeguard station on North Ocean Boulevard in Ocean Ridge near the Boynton Beach Inlet around 9:35 p.m. on May 30, 2018, just 2 days before the infant's body was discovered. Her phone stayed there until 10:01 p.m. It was at 10:06 when the GPS coordinates showed her leaving the area. As investigators scanned through her Google searches around that time, even more incriminating details about her online activity were revealed. On May 30, 2018, at 8:41 a.m., just hours before her phone appeared at the Boynton Beach Inlet, investigators said Arya searched Google for cheap hotels near the area. The search included hotels in Boca Raton, Delray Beach, and Boynton Beach. Between 8:41 a.m. and 10:45 a.m., Singh made 8 searches for hotels. From May 30th to June 30th, 2018, there were 574 searches for Boynton Inlet. Just between May 30th at 11:20 p.m. and May 31st at 9:28 p.m., investigators found a total of 34 searches for Palm Beach County News. She also visited websites related to the Boynton Beach Inlet 27 times. Between June 1st and June 30th, she visited 64 articles about Baby June on both local and national websites. Additionally, she even searched Google for the CODIS DNA database, as well as her name Arya Singh and baby San Juan Trinidad. Detectives would later say that some of her family is from Trinidad. In September of 2022, deputies from the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office finally took Arya Singh into custody. At the time, she was working as a security guard at Lynn University in Boca Raton. They interviewed Arya, as well as several of her family and friends, to try to piece together the full story. When giving her account of the day, Arya said that on May 30th, 2018, she went to a hotel room after not feeling well. She claimed that she didn't want to stay home in her state to bother anyone and avoid the questions they might ask. Then, in the hotel bathroom, Arya gave birth to a daughter. Arya further insisted that she did not have any knowledge of the pregnancy until the delivery. She claimed to have put the baby in a backpack, believing she was stillborn, never checking up on her. She kept the backpack with her while she attended a class at Florida Atlantic University, but she was unsure about what to do with the baby's body. That same night, she went to the Boynton Beach Inlet and dumped the baby in the water. Chillingly, Arya also told investigators that she had never named her child. Although in the days and weeks after the incident, Arya closely followed the Baby June story, she never came forward to claim her child. She reportedly had no other children. Detectives believe that the baby was born alive, but she was dead by the time she was placed into the water. Arya was eventually charged with the first-degree murder of her infant daughter. She pleaded not guilty in January of 2023. She's currently being held in Palm Beach County Jail pending trial. If convicted, she could face life in prison or even the death penalty. For 4 decades, John Bamford waited for justice to prevail. When he kissed his wife, Evelyn, goodbye before leaving for work, little did he think he'd return to a scene that changed his life forever. When he returned, the home he shared with her was cordoned off by police tape while officers searched the surrounding area. Not knowing what was happening, John walked in to find his home in disarray and the bed he once shared with his wife soaked in blood. The only questions were, why did this happen, and who could have done this? Our case today takes us to Miramar, Florida. It's the perfect slice of paradise, with tropical weather and pristine beaches. The city's motto, Beauty in Progress, has allowed it to maintain its laid-back beach resort charm while still being a progressive urban city. Visitors also get to enjoy a myriad of outdoor activities and soak up the Florida weather at its best. In 1980, Evelyn Marie Fisher Bamford called Miramar home. Born on March 23, 1947, Evelyn was raised alongside her brother Leonard by parents Charles and Ethel. The family lived in Sardis, a small community in the city of Chilliwack, British Columbia. Evelyn and her family were part of the Chactung First Nations tribe. She attended Chilliwack Secondary School and aspired to be a nurse. Her cousin, Stephen Point, described her as the starlight of the family. Evelyn was also a very intelligent young woman. She went on to graduate from the Riverview School of Psychiatric Nursing and began pursuing her career. She was a groundbreaker who paved her own way despite all the obstacles Indigenous people, and women in particular, faced at the time, said Point. Evelyn began working as a nurse in Vancouver soon after graduating, and it was here she would meet her future husband, John. On a night out with friends in 1969, Evelyn met John, who was a bartender at a local pub in Port Moody, British Columbia. The two had an instant connection. After a year of dating, though, he was offered a job as a beverage manager in the Grand Cayman Islands. The offer was too tempting to pass up, and with Evelyn's blessing, he left to begin his new post. However, the distance became too much, and after 6 months, Evelyn quit her job and joined John. They lived blissfully together for just over a year, but soon Evelyn started to feel the isolation of island living. Evelyn loved John, but she also enjoyed being an independent woman. She found herself needing to return to work, and so she left for Miami. Unable to be without her, John followed her 3 days later, and the couple decided to settle in Miramar, a suburb in Miami. They moved into a newly developed mobile home park called Haven Lake Estates, and it wouldn't be long before they were married. Both John and Evelyn settled into married life and work. They hadn't thought of starting a family just yet, though. After a few years of living alone together, they welcomed into their home a close friend of Evelyn's who had become their new housemate. Together, they lived in blissful harmony. John knew he had found his soulmate in Evelyn. The first time I saw her, I fell for her, you know. She was just great to be around, he said. For almost a decade, the couple would call Lake Haven Estate their home. But it was here their peaceful existence came to a brutal end. On the evening of January 22, 1980, John kissed 32-year-old Evelyn goodbye and headed to work. Their housemaid had also left to go out that evening. Evelyn was home alone, nothing out of the ordinary. She went about doing some everyday chores before retiring to bed for the night. She'd recently undergone knee surgery and was still in the process of recovering. At around midnight, her friend returned home. She'd forgotten her key and tried knocking on the door to wake Evelyn. After a while of getting no response, she started to panic. She called the police. When police eventually broke the door to enter the home, they walked into a scene straight out of a horror movie. The house was in disarray, and it was deathly silent inside. Police made their way to the back bedroom, and there they found Evelyn. She lay dead in her bed, bludgeoned to death, her blood soaking through the mattress. Autopsy reports later revealed that she'd been brutally raped before being murdered. Investigators discovered a window that had been forced open and surmised that the killer may have gained entry and escaped through the same window. Following the direction of the killer's possible escape route, police discovered that it led to a turnpike that connected to a main road out of the area. Soon after police arrived, crime scene investigators began collecting evidence before Evelyn's body was taken to the mortuary. Her husband John did not receive a call from police after they discovered Evelyn's body. What he recalls was finding police tape stuck across the door and a few police officers canvassing the area. In a daze, he entered the house and discovered the furniture and cushions were out of place. He continued to the bedroom he shared with Evelyn and found half their king-size bed had been soaked through with blood. John would be the first to be questioned. It was normal police procedure to question the spouse in a situation like this, and he was the closest thing she'd had to family, as hers were over 4,000 miles away in Chilliwack. John explained the night's events to investigators, leading up to the moment he arrived home to find it had become a crime scene. After he provided an alibi, he was allowed to go home. John continued to be cooperative with police, as he too wanted justice for his wife's murder. Police continued their investigation with the help of John and their friends. They interviewed multiple people and came to the conclusion that neither Evelyn nor John had any enemies that would want to harm either of them. In the meantime, police collected DNA from the crime scene and bagged evidence that they hoped could one day be used to find the killer. Although DNA testing was still in its infancy in the early 1980s, the technology was advancing rapidly. Detectives knew there was a possibility that something could be used at a later date to help pinpoint the culprit. Until then, though, it was going to be a waiting game. With no suspects, a cloud of suspicion loomed over John. When he'd taken Evelyn's body back home to Sardis, many people blamed him for her death, some even going as far as accusing him of her murder. The guilt he'd already been experiencing was compounded by the accusations. Evelyn's funeral service took place at St. Mary's Catholic Church in her hometown on February 2nd, 1980. She was laid to rest at the Chacton Reserve Cemetery. 3 months passed before any new information surfaced. Then, in 1980, Miramar Police Department received a call regarding a similar crime that occurred in neighboring Volusia County. An arrest warrant had been issued for rape and attempted murder, and the circumstances were eerily similar to that of Evelyn's case. When police dug a bit deeper into the suspect's background, they were shocked to discover that he'd been living just 12 houses away from Evelyn and John. Ronald Eugene Richards had also been a resident at Haven Lake Estates and lived just down the line of houses from Evelyn. Richards did not know or interact with the couple while he'd stayed in the mobile home park, but he was no stranger to the law. In 1980, he was also 32 years old and throughout his adult life had been in and out of police custody for several crimes. During the time he was living at the estate, Richards was on parole for a voluntary manslaughter charge from 1975 that occurred in Ohio involving a former girlfriend. The similarities between the crimes in Volusia and Miramar were undeniable, but it was only circumstantial, and without physical evidence, they could not bring any charges against Richards. Although police were sure that Richards was responsible for the murder of Evelyn, they needed solid evidence that could link him to the crime. Frustrations grew as the years went by, and investigators would often look back at the case file searching for something new that could pin Richards to the murder and give the family the answers they needed. Years would turn into decades, and soon Evelyn's case, although not forgotten, would turn into Broward County's oldest unsolved case. It soon became clear that Evelyn was not the only victim of the crime. John, too, spiraled out of control, consumed by drugs and alcohol. The guilt of Evelyn's death was a constant reminder of his failure to protect her, as he'd sworn to do in his wedding vows. In interviews with reporters, he said that Evelyn's murder changed his character. From that moment to today, I've been a different person altogether, because it changed the way I look at life. It changed how I feel about other people because I was very trusting before. Now I'm not, he said. After some time, though, he realized he could no longer drown his guilt in alcohol and drugs and made a drastic change. John eventually cleaned himself up and moved to England permanently. However, he never forgot Evelyn. Evelyn's family, too, would suffer. Both her parents, Charles and Ethel, would pass away without knowing the true identity of their daughter's murderer. In 2012, her brother Leonard died as well. They were all buried at the Chacton Reserve Cemetery near Evelyn. Over the years, advancements in DNA research led to the closure of many cold cases. Detectives who had been working on Evelyn's case periodically retested the evidence they collected in hopes of finding new evidence in her case. When Miramar Police Detective Jonathan Zeller took over the case, he too wanted to solve the mystery that surrounded Evelyn's brutal slaying. He had been a little boy during the height of the investigation, and growing up in Miramar, he always knew the details of the case. Although he had other cases to solve, he was especially drawn to Evelyn's case. When he could, he followed up on every lead. In 2022, they finally had a breakthrough. Newer technology allowed the old DNA samples to be retested, and investigators could now confirm that Ronald Eugene Richards was, indeed, responsible for the murder of Evelyn Marie Fisher Bamforth. It wasn't hard to find Richards. In 1981, he was charged and found guilty of the rape and attempted murder that occurred in Volusia County in March 1980, and sentenced to 50 years in prison, according to the Florida Department of Corrections. However, he was being held on charges for a parole violation in Ohio related to his initial crime in 1975. On November 30th, 2022, a grand jury indicted Richards, now age 75, on the charges of sexual battery and murder for allegedly killing Evelyn Marie Fisher Bamforth. He now awaited extradition to Broward County to face charges for Evelyn's murder. Police believe that Richards might possibly be a serial killer and are investigating other cases he may be connected to. Miramar Police Division spokesperson Talia Ruse said they were now one step closer to obtaining justice for Evelyn. As a result of developments in DNA know-how and the diligence and arduous work of Detective Jonathan Zeller, Ronald Eugene Richards has been indicted for sexual battery and homicide. Ruse added that Evelyn's case is now the oldest case solved in Miramar's history. Speaking at the press conference, Detective Zeller said it had been a whodunit case from the beginning. Finding Evelyn's killer was not only rewarding for him, but for all involved. It was a good feeling, he said, being able to solve the decades-old murder. Both Ruse and Zeller commended John Bamforth on his cooperation throughout the investigation and his search for justice. Bamforth told us he wanted justice. His life was never the same after that, said Zeller. Evelyn's cousin, Stephen Point, said her death devastated the Chacton First Nation, and it was a relief to know someone had been charged. To have this news all these years later, my thought that it's too bad Uncle Charlie and Aunt Ethel weren't alive to get this news, he said. Following the news, the family released a statement to Global News stating that she is now peacefully resting with her parents Charles and Ethel and her brother Leonard. Our family hopes all murdered Indigenous women's families receive justice someday, and that they don't have to wait for decades for closure or for the case to go cold to be solved. Our Auntie Evelyn was a beautiful, bright, fun, loving, and caring daughter, sister, aunt, and friend. Following the announcement of Richard's indictment, John Bamforth finally spoke out after 43 years. In a video call, He said that all he wanted was justice for Evelyn. I had a lot of guilt at the time because I wasn't home when I should have been, he said. He went on to describe Evelyn as the calmest person he ever met. Everybody loved her. She was just great to be around. I never had any regrets about being with her. It gave him a sense of relief knowing Richards had finally been charged. I'm not a vindictive person, but I certainly want to see justice for Evelyn, he said. For John, however, there will never be closure. I don't believe in this closure thing. One never has closure, as far as you can tell. But certainly, justice for Evelyn is the most important thing. He was selfish and senseless. Not only did he end the life of a woman who had everything to live for and could have possibly made a difference in many lives, he also tore apart several families through his evil deeds. Since the 1980s, Richards has spent the majority of his life behind bars, and with the new indictment, he will surely never taste freedom again.
It was March 25th, 1975, and the atmosphere was celebratory. Why shouldn't it be? It was Easter, and families were either planning a fun family day out or an exotic dinner at a local restaurant. It was the same for John and Mary Lyon, a couple who had 4 beautiful children. And since the children were on their spring vacation, the family decided to enjoy lunch at the Orange Bowl, a popular pizza restaurant in 1975 Maryland. But 2 of the children, Catherine Lyon, age 10, and Sheila Lyon, age 12, wanted something else before lunch. They wanted to go see the Easter exhibits. Mary correctly guessed that more than half of the town would be at this event, so she agreed to let the girls go. She hugged them, kissed them goodbye, and instructed them to be back home on or before 4 p.m. However, there was something that Mary didn't know at this time. This would be the last time that she would ever see her 2 girls. Where did Catherine and Sheila go? This is the story of 2 beautiful young girls who left home to see the Easter exhibits but never returned home to their parents. This is the story of one of the largest police investigations in Washington, a story of pain, a once unsolved disappearance that turned into a murder case. Everything appeared to be normal until 4 p.m. when Catherine and Sheila didn't arrive home. At first, Mary wasn't so worried. It wasn't the first time that they arrived home a few minutes later than she instructed. By 5 p.m., anger had set in, and Mary couldn't believe that the little girls would disobey her so boldly. However, by 7 p.m., Mary could sense that something had gone wrong, and she decided to call the police. Almost immediately, a search for Catherine and Sheila began, and this would result in one of the biggest disappearance cases in the United States. To aid the investigation of Catherine and Sheila's disappearance, the police decided to release a timeline of the girls' movements on that day. According to this timeline, they left home between 11 a.m. and 12 noon. By 1 p.m., a child in the neighborhood reported seeing Catherine and Sheila talking to a man no one knew. The child recalled that the man and the girls were standing outside the Orange Bowl restaurant. By 2 p.m., the brother of Catherine and Sheila, Jay Lyon, said he had seen his sisters at the Orange Bowl sharing a box of pizza. 30 minutes after this time, a friend of the girls told the police that she saw Catherine and Sheila walking down a street that directly led to their house. Despite the proximity of the mall and this route to the girls' house, they never made it home. Sergeant Rodney Ingalls of the Montgomery County Police Department was put on the case, and the investigator said in 1975 that this was the last spot he could place them. At this point, Sergeant Ingalls confirms that the police had no suspects, no evidence, and no motive. This was a bit weird considering he had spoken with parents, friends, neighbors, classmates, family friends, private detectives, psychics, and even strangers. Yet, nobody had anything that was helpful. It felt like Catherine and Sheila had just disappeared into thin air. What exactly happened to these 2 little girls, Catherine and Sheila? Where were they? Were they somewhere crying for help? Had they been kidnapped to another town for criminal reasons? Or had something even more sinister happened to these children? It was just a little town hidden in plain sight. How did things suddenly become different? The investigator explored all the theories that could explain the disappearance of Catherine and Sheila. It couldn't have been a kidnapping because kidnappers were notorious for asking for ransoms, but there was no case of that. However, a few amateurs tried to extort the family for money, and John Lyon even had to deposit $10,000 at a bus station in Annapolis. But nobody ever came to pick up the money. The investigator also disregarded chances that Catherine and Sheila were kidnapped for prostitution purposes, adding that they were too young for that. Some people used the opportunity to suggest that Catherine and her older sister had run away from home, but this wasn't even possible. It wasn't just because that they were too young, but because there was absolutely no reason for them to. Mary, the mother of Catherine and Sheila, further told the investigator that this wasn't a probable scenario, as her girls had shown no signs of wanting to leave. They never wanted to be away from their loving family. With every option out of the question, the Lyon family's greatest fear was brought to the fore. Did this mean that their two daughters had been killed and their bodies had been disposed of? This was a sad but plausible scenario, but their investigator refused to acknowledge it. He said that even if the little girls had been buried, there were chances that animals would have dug out the bodies. But this raised even more questions. What if the bodies were burned? What if they had been buried deep in the ground? After 5 years, Inglis had to resign, and the case had to be passed to someone else. This cycle would continue in the Montgomery County Police Department. Various detectives would come and go, but the case remained unsolved. Before long, it turned into a pebble in the shoe of the police department. All through this time, the Lyon family learned to lead normal lives, but they didn't stop wishing that one day their Catherine and Sheila, now grown, would walk through the door, smiling, holding each other's hands, and running towards them. They never stopped hoping that their daughters were alive somewhere, trying their best to come back home. This is where the second story begins. In the same year, 1975, 18-year-old man Lloyd Lee Welch went to the police to report what he had seen. The young man, who had long hair and a mustache, told the police that he was a witness, saying that he had seen the sisters get abducted. But the police immediately dismissed his account as a lie. The officers believed that his overly detailed account felt suspicious, and they felt that he did that so he could collect a reward. Welch told the police that the man who kidnapped Catherine and Sheila walked with a limp. This was good information at the time, especially because the prime suspect at the time walked with a limp. After more than 38 years, the case still remained unsolved. Detectives had given up, and people no longer discussed the disappearance or potential murder. For a brief moment, it seemed like all hope was lost. It was a certain Detective Chris Humrock who decided to give the case another shot. He went back to the archives and found the 6-page statement Welch had submitted to the police years ago. Seeing that this could be the start of finding answers, Detective Chris and another detective, Dave Davis, traveled all the way to Dover, Delaware to meet Welch. At this time, Welch was in prison at the end of a 33-year sentence for the molestation of a young girl. To make things even more complicated, as soon as the detectives meet Welch in Delaware, he says, "I know why you're here. You were here about those 2 missing kids." Of course they were, and he had been waiting his whole life for this. At first, Welch denied any involvement with the 2 sisters. He says, "I didn't kill anybody, I didn't rape anybody, I didn't do nothing to those girls. I mean, I really don't have much to tell." But Welch didn't stop talking. After what seemed like forever, he finally said something that could tie him to the case. He mentioned a certain Ray Molesky, a name that had been associated with the case for a very long time. Molesky died in prison in 2004 while serving sentences for the murder of his wife and son in the basement of his Suitland Road home. Turning himself into the police, he was sentenced, and this was where his connection to the Lyon sisters surfaced. While in prison, Molesky bragged that he knew who kidnapped and killed Catherine and Sheila. Unfortunately, the greatest fear of Mary Lyon and her family was confirmed. Her 2 beautiful girls had died 38 years ago. In 2001, a tipster had also informed the police that Molesky was responsible for the crime, and even though so many elements of the story were checked out, none led to the discovery of Catherine and Sheila's bodies or the truth about their killer. Molesky was contacted in 2001 in prison, and he admitted to knowing who had kidnapped and killed the girls. But he said he wouldn't say anything more unless he was shortlisted for a prison transfer. But Molesky's death in 2004 will take the mystery case back to where it all started and had no prime suspects. With Molesky's death, it was impossible to know if he had been a part of Catherine and Sheila's disappearance or if he had said all of this for his own advantage. There was also a particular sketch of interest. A witness in 1975 had given a vivid description of a man with long hair who was staring weirdly at the girls. At the end of the day, the sketch bore an uncanny resemblance to the mugshot of Welch. After a series of subsequent sessions with Welch, the convict finally admitted to helping abduct the Lyon sisters in 1975. Welch said that he believed that Catherine and Sheila had been kidnapped for sexual reasons, and investigators believed that he had also burned the body of one of the sisters. Even though he confessed to being a part, Welch maintained that he did not sexually assault Catherine or Sheila, nor was he directly involved in their murder. But the law disagrees. His admittance to their abduction directly links him to their unfortunate death. The court eventually sentenced Welch to another 48 years in prison with the option of becoming eligible for parole when he is 80. However, his chances of parole are very slim, according to attorney Wes Nance.
For the first time since anyone saw their innocent faces 40 years ago, police say they now know who kidnapped, molested, and murdered these two young sisters.
This seemed like a perfect ending, but it wasn't. The family still have no idea who Welch had committed the crimes with. They still didn't find the bodies of their children for closure. After 42 years, the family could still not give their daughters the burial that they deserved. At the end of the sentencing, John Lyon, the father of Catherine and Sheila, said,
"We just want to say simply, thank you. And it's been a long time. And we're tired. And we just want to go home."
Former Assistant Chief of Montgomery County Police Department, Russ Rammel, sums it up in his words after the sentencing.
At the end of the day, from the beginning, I met with many of the officers involved in this case, and from the beginning explained this wasn't going to have a happy ending. This is not a happy ending.
This is definitely not a happy ending story, but we are glad that someone is finally paying for the premature death of the Lyon sisters. We hope that Mary Lyon finds closure after this, and also we hope that Catherine Lyon and Sheila Lyon keep resting in peace. In April 2019, the parents of A.J. Fround, Andrew Fround, and Joanne Cunningham had called 911 to report that A.J. was missing. The father sounded calm as he explained to the operator that he just got home and couldn't find his son. He further explained that he had checked the entire house, including the basement and the street in which they had lived, all to no avail. Immediately, police officers were dispatched to the scene, but what initially started as a search for a 5-year-old boy would soon quickly turn into a murder case. How did it happen so fast? That's what we're here to find out. A.J. Fround was described as a happy child, one that everyone wanted to be around. He was young and full of life and very brilliant for his age, as his mother pointed out. But despite the charm that little A.J. possessed, his family had verbally and physically abused him and denied him the care that he deserved. Since 2012, Joanne, his mother, had been under the radar of the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services, all thanks to her drug use and child neglect. However, she was finally granted custody of A.J. in 2015, after Joanne and Andrew had complied with drug treatment services, a factor that made them eligible to be parents. In February 2016, Joanne and Andrew were finally given legal custody, making them A.J.'s parents once again. The drug use between the parents would subside to the minimum for the next few years, and there would be no reports of drug use at home until 2018. In 2018, the DCS will be contacted by an anonymous caller to report drug use in the home. The caller stated that Andrew and Joanne were housing a heroin addict, but unfortunately there was no investigation done to verify his claim. The same year, a social worker would discover that AJ was suffering abuse in his own home. His arm slightly bruised and his face containing a number of blood scars. At the same time, authorities had found Joanne passed out in a car, and it was clear that she had relapsed on drugs. It is important to note that AJ had a younger sibling who lived in the same house with their parents. After an interview with Joanne, the investigators would admit that there were no signs of maltreatment and that the boys were doing just fine. But it would become impossible to deny episodes of abuse in December 2018 when a police officer found a large bruise on AJ's hip. While this was clearly an episode of maltreatment, Joanne managed to convince the authorities that AJ had been injured by the dog. A lie that the boy would also corroborate with, mostly out of fear. Later, AJ would tell a doctor, maybe someone hit me with a belt, maybe mommy didn't mean to hurt me. However, both kids were released back to the family based on the fact that the father, Andrew, would be more present at home. Unfortunately, things eventually got out of hand. That lands us back in April 2019, when Andrew picked up his phone to inform the police that he couldn't find his son. Immediately, a search began for little AJ. Where could he have gone? Did he run away from home, or did someone kidnap AJ right in his own home? Andrew said that the last time he saw AJ was around 9 p.m., which was just around his bedtime. Due to the seriousness and the urgency of the situation, the FBI were called in to assist. To be able to understand the motive behind the disappearance of AJ, the police decided to begin their search for the family home in Crystal Lake. The home was unfit for living as it had garbage everywhere and some of the floors had been ripped up. Fortunately, AJ's little brother wasn't being neglected or abused at the time of the investigation. But AJ's disappearance remained a mystery. Where had the little boy gone? Was AJ in trouble? Had he escaped the home due to the abuse that he suffered? Or perhaps the worst fear. Was he dead? 3 days after the call that involved the police, their worst fear was confirmed. AJ's body was discovered in a shallow grave, wrapped in plastic, with straws and hay placed over his body. Investigators found the body of AJ at Woodstock, Illinois, which was around 10 miles away from the family's home. The parents were arrested and immediately charged to court for the murder of their own son, AJ Fromm.
It is with heavy heart that the Crystal Lake Police Department reports that we have located what we believe to be the body of Andrew AJ Friend. Investigators located what they believe to be AJ's body, buried in a shallow grave wrapped in plastic in a remote area of Woodstock, Illinois.
According to the investigators that were assigned to the case, all hell lit loose on the night of April 15th, when AJ had soiled his clothes in death. This had infuriated his mother, who decided to punish him in her own way. As punishment, she forced him awake and made him take a cold shower. Remember, it was midnight and it was also freezing cold. But this wasn't all. Joanne repeatedly beat him as he took his bath and shouting at him. Later in the court, Andrew would confess saying that Joanne hit AJ's head with a shower head, a blow that led to the young boy losing his life. This is because the autopsy of AJ's body would reveal that he suffered multiple injuries to his head and torso, and these injuries were so bad that they caused his brain to swell. The autopsy also revealed that the blood of AJ had aspirated into his lungs, making him unable to breathe. Unfortunately, all of these beatings happened while the child was placed under a freezing shower, shivering to his death. Andrew wanted to minimize his involvement in the murder, but he wasn't as smart as the investigators. On the night that AJ died, investigations showed that Joanne had used Andrew's phone to search for how to conduct CPR on a child. Later on, a gruesome video will be discovered on Andrew's phone. Little AJ appears in the video with bruises all over his body. Despite his pleas, Joanne repeatedly hits him for wetting himself. In another recording, AJ can be heard saying that he no longer wants to be a part of the family, but his mother wouldn't hear it. Where he would go, she quizzed. She even tells him that his father will pick her and his little brother over him, a statement which definitely crushed little AJ. Later in the same recording, Joanne would ask AJ why he wants bad people to hurt her. Candid and honest, AJ responded in his innocent, childish voice, "So I don't ever see you again." The video was discovered when Andrew signed a consent form that allowed the police officer to check his phone. Interestingly, his phone also contained text messages between Andrew and Joanne, and in one of them there was a shopping list which included gloves, a duct tape, and air freshener. As regards to the video that was shared with the court documents read, AJ is seen to be naked except for some small bandages around both wrists and circling his hips. AJ is seen to be holding an ice pack to his face, and when he removes it, he is seen to have deep red bruising around his eyes. AJ's father tried to downplay his involvement in the murder of his own son, but later in the trial it was discovered that rather than call the authorities after AJ became unconscious, Andrew had stashed the body of the 5-year-old and placed it in the basement. Then, when the stench from AJ's body could no longer be hidden, he put the body in his truck and buried it in the empty lot in a shallow grave. Till the day of his death, AJ lived in constant pain and neglect. When the police visited the family's home for the investigative reasons, they reported that the house reeked of feces, urine, and unpacked dirt. His father wasn't any different from Joanne. He had repeatedly tried to deny his direct involvement in the murder of AJ, but the evidence leveled against him could not be denied. He was just as evil and neglectful towards AJ. In fact, the decision to put the 5-year-old under a running shower was the idea of none other than Andrew, who was opposed to Joanne's more violent form of punishment. In court, Andrew would later plead guilty to the charges of involuntary manslaughter and concealment of homicidal death. After prosecutors agreed to drop the first-degree murder charges, Andrew was sentenced to 30 years in prison and would become eligible for parole only after 19 years. AJ's mother, Joanne Cunningham, also pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to 35 years in prison. After her sentencing, Joanne's motherly side finally came to the fore.
I had the privilege of having AJ as a son. When I had him, it was one of the happiest days of my life. I love him. I miss him. There's nothing I wouldn't do to bring him back. My children are the greatest gift God could have ever given me. They are my whole world. They're the reason I breathe. Anyone who truly knows me can see how much I love being a mother more than anything in the world. Being a mother defines me.
In her closing remarks, she told the entire court that she would give her life to have AJ come back to life. But the reality is dark, sad, and cannot be changed. No matter how great her pain is, she would forever live with the conviction that she murdered her own child, beautiful 5-year-old AJ. The greatest tragedy is thinking of all the things that AJ could have turned out to be, and all the beautiful things that he would never do. May his young and peaceful soul find rest. On August 7, 2014, a taxi driver pulled up to the St. Regis Resort in Bali. An attractive young American couple leaving the luxury hotel piled their large suitcase into the cab and asked the driver to wait while they checked out. He complied, probably hoping for a nice tip. However, as time went by and the young couple failed to return to the cab, the driver eventually opened his trunk to remove their belongings. That's when he saw blood in his trunk, and it was oozing slowly out of the suitcase. The cab driver called the police, and when they opened the suitcase, they found the body of a woman inside. The young couple was nowhere to be found. Sheila von Weismack was a wealthy woman. She had been married to renowned composer James L. Mack, who sued a cruise line after being injured on a ship, winning more than $1 million to add to an already lucrative lifestyle. When James Mack passed away in 2006, he left behind a grieving widow, a lot of money, and an 11-year-old daughter, Heather. Heather and her mother had a tempestuous relationship with allegations of abuse on both sides. Heather moved out in 2014, and Sheila decided to take her daughter on a luxury 2-week vacation in an attempt to heal their relationship. Later, Sheila's friends would say that they warned her not to take her daughter out of the country, for they thought that Heather was unstable. Nevertheless, the two arrived at the St. Regis Resort and the trip started out wonderfully. Though, to be fair, the hotel has a private beach, world-class food, multiple swimming pools, and rooms starting at $690 per night. So it's kinda hard to imagine anyone having a bad time. By the way, please be sure to like and subscribe so that one day I might be able to afford like 14 minutes at this place. I'm not kidding, it literally has an in-house butler. Heather and Sheila's trip started out beautifully, but then something odd started to happen. Heather started disappearing for hours at a time. Finally, Sheila woke up one night to find her daughter missing. When she went to the front desk to ask if they had seen Heather leave, the front desk told Sheila that her daughter was probably staying in the other room. What other room? Sheila asked. Why, the other room that had been charged on the credit card, of course. That's when Sheila found out that Heather had invited her boyfriend, 21-year-old Tommy Schaefer, to Bali. Heather had also charged his first-class flight, which cost $12,000, and the room to her mom's credit card. Tommy and Heather were asleep in the room, which had already cost Sheila more than $1,000. Sheila was furious. She and her daughter screamed at each other in the lobby of the St. Regis, and it sounds like the hotel staff was pretty taken aback. One of the hotel staff later told the Daily Mail, "The mother had all the appearances of one of our upmarket guests, but the behavior she and her daughter showed did not belong in our hotel. This does not bode well for my future at the St. Regis, given that I would have to rob a liquor store to afford it." Now, here's where the story gets a little tricky. There were a few different versions of what exactly happened next, how premeditated it was, who said what, and who attacked whom. And at the end of the day, a lot of the stories contradict each other, and none of them come from the mouth of the victim. But here's what we do know for sure. On the morning of August 7th, Sheila, her daughter Heather, and Tommy got into a fight in Sheila's hotel room. By the time the fight was over, Sheila had been beaten to death with a heavy glass and metal fruit bowl. The couple packed Sheila's body into a large suitcase, which involved breaking several of her bones and bending her, to quote one police officer, like an accordion. Then the lovers brought the suitcase down to the cab. Here's where their problems started. I mean, aside from being murderers. Tommy and Heather went to the front desk and requested access to Sheila's safety deposit box, which contained some valuables and their passports. However, hotel staff were under strict instructions not to give anyone besides Sheila access to the box. Not knowing what else to do, Heather and Tommy snuck out the back door of the hotel and hopped a different cab, hoping that their American accents and ID would be enough to get them on a plane. They struck out. Now knowing that they were stuck in Indonesia for the foreseeable future, Tommy and Heather went to a nearby motel to lay low. They were caught by police the next day. Eventually, I'm going to tell you a sympathetic version of events. A version of events told by Heather that describes an abusive mother in self-defense gone wrong. But, to be fair, before I tell you that version of the story, let's go through all the other stories that were pulled out first. Story 1. Heather and Tommy claimed that an armed gang had killed Sheila and then taken the two of them hostage. They escaped and hid out in a motel for some reason. That story was shot down pretty fast. For one thing, the St. Regis has CCTV and the armed gang clearly didn't exist. So, Heather switched it up to Story 2. Heather told her mother that she was pregnant. Sheila flew into a rage and attacked her daughter. Tommy hit Sheila with a fruit basket in order to protect his pregnant girlfriend. This story was also debunked because Sheila's emails clearly showed that she had known about the pregnancy for months. This brings us to Story 3. Sheila went wild for no apparent reason and called Tommy a racist slur. Tommy hit her in anger. The story was blown apart when texts between Tommy and Heather revealed that the two had been talking about killing Sheila for some time. If right now you're thinking, well, we all joke about killing our moms sometimes, then A, you should probably stop, and B, you should know that Tommy then sent several messages back and forth with his cousin Robert Bibbs in Chicago, and the two of them debated the best way to kill Sheila. So, spur of the moment self-defense looks a little less likely. When the case went to trial, one thing was made clear. Whoever might have done the planning, it was Tommy who actually wielded the murder weapon. He was given 18 years in an Indonesian prison. Heather was sentenced to 10 years. Later, Robert Bibbs, Tommy's cousin, was sentenced in a Chicago court to 9 years in jail for his work advising Tommy on how to commit murder. Now that Heather and Tommy were both in prison, yet another story came out. This was story number 4.
Came to Bali, my mom found out. I killed her myself. And then I told Tommy that if he did not help me clean the room and get rid of the body, that I would tell the police that he did it. I would pay money to get him arrested.
Heather claimed that she had stolen Tommy's phone and texted back and forth, setting him up for the murder so that she could blackmail him into helping her. Why, do you ask?
When I was 10, my mother killed my father in a hotel in Athens, Greece. 2 weeks before I came to Bali, I found out that she killed my father, and I made it up in my heart, in my mind, my soul, in my blood, and the oxygen running through my body, that I wanted to kill my mother.
This story blew up around the world, but like all the stories before, it too was quickly debunked. Tommy Schaefer stood by his guilty plea, reiterating from prison that he had been the one to kill Sheila. The messages between Tommy and his cousin confirmed that. And the claim that this was a revenge killing is a little hard to swallow given the fact that Heather's father hadn't died under suspicious circumstances. He died from a blood clot in his lung. Heather gave birth to her daughter Stella in prison. Under Indonesian law, she was allowed to keep Stella with her for 2 years before the toddler was given over to a guardian. Stella and Heather will be back together when Heather's prison sentence ends. Tommy Schaefer has become a born-again Christian. He has baptized more than 50 men in prison and says that he is not actively seeking parole. Tommy recently told a reporter from the New Zealand Herald that he knows he is guilty and deserves his punishment and that he will do his best to serve God in prison. The only person that Tommy does not seem to have any love for is his former girlfriend, Heather. Tommy says that while he takes responsibility for his own actions, he nevertheless feels that he was manipulated by Heather, whom he describes to be as a black hole and a sociopath. Heather, meanwhile, is now sticking with her 5th and most convincing story. She tells reporters that her taped video confession was a lie and that she was blackmailed into recording it by Tommy, though why he would do so while maintaining his guilt is unclear. Heather now claims that she endured years of physical and verbal abuse from her mother, Sheila, and that the night of Bali was simply the last in a long history of attacks. Heather claims that Tommy was indeed defending her that night from an alcoholic and serially abusive mother. In spite of his hatred for Heather, Tommy backs up the claim that Sheila was abusive. He claims that he saw Sheila attack her daughter and that she was often drunk. Police records show that before Sheila's death, police had been called to the Von Weiss Mack house 86 times over the past decade. Neighbors say that mother and daughter frequently had screaming fights and would call the cops on each other. Sheila's friends say that she was a good mother and that it was Heather who was abusive and unbalanced. During one of their fights, Heather pushed Sheila and broke her arm. On the other hand, Heather shows scars on her arms and says that her mother used to put cigarettes out on her skin. Whatever the true motivation was, we will probably never know. Heather has told too many stories to be a believable witness. Bystanders and friends are all biased towards one or the other. And Sheila von Wiesmack, socialite, millionaire, widow, friend, and mother, will never speak again. A beautiful family with 6 adopted children and 2 mothers in a loving relationship. A Facebook and an Instagram account filled with idyllic photos of their children learning, traveling, and smiling together in matching outfits. Meet the Hart family, a family who seemed to be filled with love and laughter until they shocked the world with an unthinkable case of familicide. It was 3:38 p.m. on Monday, March 26, 2018, when a 911 call came in from Quan Creek Crossing on California Scenic Highway 1. German tourists were enjoying the iconic view when something jarring caught their eye. A gold GMC Yukon XL was upside down in the Pacific Ocean at the bottom of the rocky cliff. When authorities arrived on the scene, they found the body of Jennifer Hart at the wheel of the SUV. The body of her partner, Sarah Hart, was pinned between the roof and the back seats. The bodies of 3 children, 19-year-old Marcus, 14-year-old Jeremiah, and 14-year-old Abigail, were also found at the crash scene along with Jennifer and Sarah. It was on that afternoon that 2 searches began. The first search was for the other 3 children. It was assumed that they were in the car and had been swept out to sea, but no one could say for certain until their bodies were found. The second search was for answers. Everyone who knew the Hart family wanted to understand how a family who looked so happy in photos online and appeared so very normal at music festivals with their friends could end up driving straight off a 100-foot cliff into the ocean. At first, the Hart family's friends and online followers defended the family, saying this surely must have been an accident. There had to be some explanation. Crash analysts were quick to point out that there were no skid marks at the scene. The SUV hadn't braked at all before plunging over the cliff. The speedometer was stuck at 90 miles per hour in the wrecked vehicle. Soon enough, dark details about the family began to emerge. When all the puzzle pieces were finally put together, they revealed a disturbing saga of abuse and neglect. The Harts had removed their children from public school and moved from place to place in an effort to evade Child Protective Services in multiple states. How could Jennifer and Sarah have hidden the painful truth about their home life from public view? How did they fool so many people into believing they were the perfect family? And most importantly, how did Child Protective Services fail to help these 6 children? The answers to these questions came together pretty quickly once everyone started talking to one another about the small details they noticed over the years. Jen and Sarah first became licensed foster parents in 2005. They had one 15-year-old foster daughter. Jen and Sarah told the teenage girl she could live with them and be the older sister to their soon-to-be adopted children. Friends have said that the couple frequently complained about their foster daughter, claiming she did things like eat out of the trash. The foster daughter, now an adult, has stated their claims were untrue. Once the first 3 adoptive siblings arrived at the Hart home in March 2006, Jen and Sarah decided to abandon their foster daughter without any warning. They dropped her off at a therapist appointment and never returned for her, leaving her to be placed in another foster home. The adoptive children who first arrived in their home were Marcus, Hannah, and Abigail. They were ages 7, 4, and 2 and came from Texas to the Hart home in Minnesota. It wasn't until 2008 that the first hints of possible abuse and neglect started to filter in to authorities. Several complaints were made to CPS by the children's school. Hannah and Abigail were both seen eating out of trash cans at their school. They had also complained of bruises on their abdomens. The children told their teachers that Jen hit them with a belt. An investigation was opened, but nothing ever came of it. Jen and Sarah told social workers that the children had gotten the bruises accidentally and that they were eating from the trash due to food insecurity issues left over from prior trauma before being adopted. The staff at the school didn't believe these excuses, but they soon stopped reporting things to the authorities in fear that the children would be further punished at home. This was the first time that the children slipped through the cracks. The abuse continued. Sarah and Jen withdrew the 3 children from school and began homeschooling them for a short time, until the adoption agency required them to have the children in public school in order to finalize the adoptions of the next sibling set to enter the Hart home, Devontae, Jeremiah, and Sierra. In September 2010, the school again reported Jen and Sarah for abuse. Abigail had bruises all over her stomach, back, and buttocks. She told her teachers that Jen spanked her with a closed fist because she had a penny in her pocket that Jen thought she had stolen. When CPS interviewed the children, Abigail said that being grounded meant you had to stay in bed all day and miss lunchtime. Abigail was 6 years old at the time and only appeared to be the size of a young toddler. During a mandated doctor visit, the doctor noted her size, but Jen and Sarah explained that Abigail was just naturally small, saying they didn't know her family's medical history. Despite Abigail blaming Jen for the abuse, Sarah claimed that she was the one who had spanked the little girl, stating she bent Abigail over the bathtub and spanked her repeatedly until it had gotten out of control. Charges were filed in court against Sarah for domestic assault and malicious punishment of a child. During the death investigation, a former friend of Jen's brought an email from 2010 to light. Jen told the friend that Sarah had said some hurtful things. Jen went on to say, "For quite some time, I have felt very underappreciated and taken for granted in our relationship, and at times unloved," she wrote. "While I know deep in my heart how much she loves me, she is just horrible about showing it. I have felt that I have been raising the kids on my own," she added. "I need a break." What was actually happening in their household? Every couple experiences relationship troubles, but in hindsight, perhaps there was something more serious going on. Parenting children with backgrounds of trauma like the 6 kids the Harts adopted is no easy task. The behavior issues can be exhausting and draining to manage on a daily basis. Pressure between the 2 women was beginning to build. In April 2011, Sarah pled guilty to domestic assault. She was given a suspended jail sentence, probation, a $300 fine, and ordered to take a skill building class by CPS with the goal of ending physical discipline in the home. It seems as if the children were no longer slipping through the cracks with authorities, but in actuality, things were still amiss in the Hart family home. Despite the abuse on record, the Harts were still able to finalize the adoption of the second sibling set. Devontae, Jeremiah, and Sierra were now permanent members of the Hart family. Jen and Sarah quickly withdrew all 6 children from public school. They never attended public school again. As soon as Sarah completed the terms of her probation, she moved from Minnesota to Westland, Oregon, and took a job working at Kohl's clothing store. A few months later, Jen followed with their 6 children. While Sarah was away, a family friend named Alexandra Argyropoulos spent 2 weeks helping Jen with the children. Initially, she thought Jennifer Hart was a loving mother. However, after spending time in their home, she became concerned. Alexandra stated to Child Protective Services that love and compassion for the children was largely absent and that they were frequently and harshly punished for common childlike and adolescent behaviors, such as laughing too loudly. The offending child wouldn't be allowed to speak for an entire day or be forced to stare at the wall for an extended period of time. She also said Jen often withheld meals and the children appeared constantly hungry. By this point, alarm bells should have been ringing for authorities. Something was clearly very, very wrong at home. Caseworkers interviewed the children separately. The kids gave the workers nearly identical answers that were obviously pre-rehearsed. Child Protective Services ordered the children to see a doctor who noted their heights and weights were so low that they weren't even on the growth charts for the children's ages. Since the children appeared to have no other health concerns aside from being small, the case was closed.
You're gonna take Lulu? Oh, Eric. Lulu and Eddie before I go to bed.
happened in multiple
Eric.
relationship homes where they met many new friends, enjoyed bringing up family, and loved Jen's idyllic and inspirational Facebook posts. Family and friends who criticized Jen's parenting were estranged by the couple, with Sarah following along behind Jen. The family also participated in social
Do you
justice
have
protests.
food out?
In 2014, a photo of Devontae hugging a police officer went viral, bringing a lot of attention to the Hart family. This led to another move, this time over the state line into Washington, where the final cracks formed in the family breakdown. The Harts moved in next door to a retired couple named Dana and Bruce DeKalb in 2017. Everything was quiet from the Harts' home next door until one night at 1:30 in the morning, their doorbell rang and Bruce answered it. Hannah was at the door. She had twigs in her hair and her front teeth were missing. "Hide me," he pleaded. "They whip us with a belt." She ran into the DeKalb's home, up the stairs, and hid in the bedroom where Dana was sleeping. "You gotta help. Please protect me. Don't make me go back," she said, waking Dana. "They're racist and they abuse us." Jen came over a few minutes later and forced Hannah to return home. The next morning, the DeKalb's doorbell rang again at the ungodly hour of 6:30 a.m. It was the Hart family. Hannah brought the DeKalbs a handwritten apology letter, making excuses for her behavior the night before.
Call Eddie.
Soon, Devontae began sneaking over to the DeKalb's home and begging them for food whenever his parents weren't paying attention. Dana and Bruce were worried, but also afraid to cause drama by reporting their neighbors to Child Protective Services.
I was just getting ready to call
When Devontae told Dana not to tell his mother, she asked him which mother he meant. He explained that there was Mom and Sarah, and that Mom was responsible for the abuse. Sarah didn't used to go along with it, Devontae told Miss DeKalb, but was now tolerating Jennifer's behavior.
About a week ago or so, one of the children came over and started asking for food. And it went on for a period of time until we kind of determined that he was probably reaching out. And we determined that we should call the Child Protective Services, and that's what we did.
Dana's father listened to his daughter's concerns and decided to call CPS himself. Investigators showed up at the family's home, and what happened next has been mostly speculation. It seems that the family decided to go on the run again. 54 hours after leaving their home next door to the DeKalbs, Jennifer Hart drove their SUV over a 100-foot cliff onto the rocky shore of the Pacific Ocean. The children had fallen through the cracks of Child Protective Services for the last time. The bodies of 2 of the 3 missing children later washed ashore. Devontae was never found, but is assumed to have washed out to sea. A Google search from the day before the incident found on Sarah Hart's phone said, "Is death by drowning relatively painless?" Toxicology reports showed that Jennifer was drunk at the time of the crash. Sarah and the 2 of the children had overdosed on Benadryl in the car. While some of our questions were answered, the biggest question of all still remains. How did 6 children cry out for help for more than a decade without being rescued?
Okay, what is the emergency?
I have a children now here named Alex. He just passed out here in my bathroom.
Okay, is he awake right now?
I think he's passed out.
Okay, you think he's unconscious?
Yeah.
The unconscious man in this phone call is named Alex Cox. Alex was found by his stepson as he laid on the floor of his bathroom.
Okay, is he on his back or on his stomach? Where is he at?
He's on his back.
Okay. Can you lay him flat on his back on the ground?
I tried to just there's feces there, and I'm trying to just keep full right now.
You said he's what?
There's feces on the ground.
Okay. I know that's gross, but if we can just go ahead and get him flat on his back, I want to make sure he's breathing, because if he's not, we're going to do abusing. Does he seem more awake or more asleep? Okay. Is he opening his eyes or moving at all?
He's breathing.
Okay. Is he breathing normally, like his chest is rising and falling? He's not making any weird sounds?
Yeah, you seem very echoey. Sound like.
He's outside
okay,
now.
If he's doing that, we need to start CPR, so I need you to get a flat on his back on the ground.
A little too cold for him out there.
Alex Cox had been struck down when blood clots wedged in his lungs. When his stepson found him, Alex had not only lost control of his bowels, but
There's
was
that
also
pasta in bowl
that
in there.
combined with his weight made CPR difficult.
Okay.
Alex's wife, whom he had married less than 3 weeks previously, arrived just before the paramedics.
Okay.
No, he's not breathing. No, he's too big.
Okay, just try to get him on his back so we can do chest compression. Okay, ma'am, the paramedics are pulling up, but in the meantime, we need him to get flat on his back and we need to give him chest compressions, okay?
Chest compression. But
Does she know how to do CPR?
yeah. No problem.
Okay.
How far are you?
We're pulling up out front right now, so they're grabbing their equipment and they're coming in.
Alex Cox died on December 12, 2019. Blood clots in his lungs combined with high blood pressure means that under any normal circumstances, this would be an open and shut case of natural death. But the body of Alex Cox is the sixth corpse with a connection to his sister, Lori Vallow. And for that reason, the police aren't so sure. In the past, our true crime profiles have focused on 911 calls that reveal, make, or break a case. But in the case of Alex Cox, the 911 call you just heard doesn't begin to tell the whole story. In this case, we have to go all the way back to 2006, when Alex's sister, Lori, married her fourth husband, Charles Vallow. Lori and Charles Vallow had a number of kids from previous marriages, but the two kids they were raising together were these ones. Lori's daughter Tylee and JJ, an adopted son born into Charles' extended family. If there was a warning sign that all was not well, it came when Lori's brother Alex Cox was arrested for aggravated assault on one of Lori's former husbands. Alex used a stun gun on Lori's ex, Joseph Bryan, in the August of 2007 and threatened to kill him. Alex claimed that it was because Ryan was threatening his sister. It was not the last time Alex Cox would resort to violence when he felt Lori was threatened. But aside from this incident, Lori and her new husband, Charles Vallow, appeared to have a happy marriage. By 2014, the family of four was living together on the Hawaiian islands of Kauai. Friends of Lori's say that she was a devoted mother, showing as much care and attention to the
fed Aqua.
JJ as she did to her biological daughter. Then in 2015, Lori started obsessively reading the work of author Chad Daywell. Daywell was a minor celebrity in the world of preppers. People who believe that
I had to make it even, so I took it from the center because I saw you was building something there.
And his speeches at prepper events.
And that's the message I really want to share, is that we can prepare ourselves to
I got one more.
those trials that are coming, and that's the whole reason you're here. I know that the Spirit has guided you and prompted you that you have a role to play.
Chad and his wife, Tammy Daybell, had recently purchased a home in Idaho after Chad twice heard a voice telling him to move to the city of Rexburg. It was around this time that Lori began reading his books. In early 2017, Lori and Charles Vallow left Hawaii with Tylee and JJ, settling in as a family in Arizona. A year later, Lori's ex, Joseph Bryan, the one her brother had attacked 10 years previously, died. His death was ruled to be a heart attack, though authorities would later revisit this in light of what followed. In the fall of 2018, Lori attended an event for preppers organized by Preparing a People, an organization that says its mission is to help prepare the people of this earth for the second coming of Christ. It was at this event that she met her favorite author, Chad Daybell. Over the following months, Lori and Chad appeared on a number of podcasts together and began to exchange emails. On January 22, 2019, Lori received an email from Chad with the subject line, Demon with the name Nick Schneider. That month, while Charles was away on a business trip, Lori transferred $35,000 out of her husband's business account, funneling it into an unknown location. She also transferred 2,000 of his enterprise points to her personal account. When confronted by her husband, Lori told him that she was a god sent to carry out the work of 144,000 people who would survive the second coming of Christ. She also told Charles that she knew he wasn't her real husband. According to Lori, the real Charles was dead and his body was inhabited by a demon named Nick Schneider. Lori told her husband that she was planning to kill him and that she had an angel who would help her dispose of his body. Alarmed, Charles contacted the police and told officers that he was concerned about what Lori might do to the kids. Charles petitioned a 72-hour hold and evaluation of Lori. Lori checked herself in for evaluation, but was discharged a few hours later. In early February, Charles filed for divorce from Lori. On the advice of his attorneys, he removed her as a beneficiary on his life insurance policy. However, after a few months, Charles decided to stop the divorce proceedings and try to make his marriage work. Lori was most likely grateful for the help. Tylee had recently become a teenager, and Lori described her as becoming difficult to deal with. "She's a zombie," Lori told her friend Melanie Gibb, complaining about Tylee's teenage moodiness. It was a phrase that would haunt Melanie later. Tylee, Lori repeated, became a zombie around age 13. Although Charles was trying to make his marriage to Lori work, her connection to Chad Daywell had changed her. Charles told friends that preparing a people was a cult, and that Lori was still saying he had been replaced with an evil spirit named Nick Schneider. In early 2019, Charles arrived at Lori's Arizona home to pick up JJ and Tylee. Also present at the house was Lori's brother, Alex Cox. Shortly after Charles arrived, 2 shots rang out, and another of Lori's husbands was dead.
Yes. Both. The police and ambulance. What the emergency there? I had a fight with my brother-in-law and I shot him in self-defense.
Lori's brother claimed that Charles had become violent, though those who knew him protest strongly that Charles was a gentle soul. The 2 witnesses to the shooting, Lori and 15-year-old Tylee, backed up Alex's story. That evening, Lori threw a pool party at the scene of the crime. It was only after the death of her husband that Lori found out he had removed her as a beneficiary of his life insurance policy. She was outraged. Later, when questioned by police, this would be a topic she would return to again and again. In September of 2019, Lori, Tylee, and JJ moved to Rexburg, where they were close to Lori's friend and favorite author, Chad Daywell. Originally, Tylee had planned to stay behind in Arizona, but she ultimately decided she didn't want to be separated from her beloved little brother. Shortly after the move, Lori's brother also came to Rexburg. Alex Cox moved into the same housing complex as his sister, niece, and nephew. On September 8, 2019, phone records show that Tylee, JJ, Lori, and Alex took a family trip to Yellowstone National Park. Photos from that day show a happy family. They also record the last day that anyone outside of her family saw Tylee alive. 10 days later, Lori was visited by her friend Melanie Gibb. At the time, the 2 women were co-hosts of a religious podcast. During this visit, Lori complained that JJ was acting rambunctious and had knocked over a picture of Jesus. She said that JJ was acting like a zombie. As Gibb and Lori were re-recording a podcast episode, Alex Cox stopped by his sister's apartment, holding a sleeping JJ in his arms. It was the last time Gibb or anyone outside of the family saw JJ alive. Meanwhile, across town, Chad Daybell's wife Tammy was unloading groceries from her car when a man wearing a ski mask drove by and pointed what she assumed was a paintball gun at her. The gun didn't go off, and when Tammy yelled for her husband, the masked man drove away. The Fremont County Sheriff's Office believed the incident was a prank. 2 weeks later, police were called to the Daybell's house again. This time, Tammy Daybell was dead. Her husband, Chad, told police that she had gone to bed with a bad cough and never woken up. Although Tammy was only 49, the death was ruled to be natural and no autopsy was performed. Less than 2 weeks later, newly widowed Chad Daybell and newly widowed Lori Vallow were married in Hawaii. The wedding was paid for in part by the $430,000 Chad had received from his wife's insurance policy. JJ and Tylee are not in any of the wedding photos. That's because at that point, JJ and Tylee hadn't been seen in over a month. When speaking to acquaintances, Lori and Chad told a variety of stories. They told one acquaintance that Lori had no children. They told another that Tylee had died in 2017. At the request of JJ's paternal grandmother, police in Rexburg went to visit Lori and Chad once they were home from their honeymoon. Lori told police that JJ wasn't missing at all. He was staying with her friend Melanie in Arizona. When questioned by police, Melanie denied the story. She hadn't seen JJ in months. Tipped off that something was wrong, police returned to the home of Lori and Chad, only to find that the couple had abruptly left town. It was now December of 2019. Rexburg police publicly announced the disappearance of Tylee and JJ. While the public began to pray for the reappearance of the two children, Chad and Lori reappeared in Hawaii and refused to cooperate with the investigation. At this point, suspicious of the quick wedding that followed her death, police decided to exhume Tammy Daybell's body and perform an autopsy. While the results of the autopsy have yet to be made public, we do know that police have reclassified her death as suspicious. On December 30th, 2019, Rexburg police issued a news release saying that they strongly believe JJ and Tylee's lives to be in danger. The public began to demand answers from the two parents who walked the beaches of Hawaii while refusing to answer questions about the whereabouts of Tylee and JJ. Some private citizens even began posting the same question over and over in Amazon reviews of Chad Daybell's book, asking him, "Where are the children?" Finally, law enforcement located Chad and Lori on the Hawaiian island of Kauai and served them with a court order. Lori was required to physically produce Tylee and JJ to the Idaho Department of Welfare in Rexburg, Idaho, or to go to the Rexburg police within 5 days of being served with the order. When Lori did not show up to her court date, she was arrested on 2 counts of felony desertion of a child, resisting and obstructing an officer, solicitation of a crime, and contempt. She was extradited to Idaho, and Chad followed her there. While Lori was in prison, a search warrant was served on Chad's property. Here, the FBI found the answer to the question that had been haunting the state of Idaho. After nearly 9 months, JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan have been found. Their bodies were uncovered in Chad Daybell's backyard, buried separately and weeks apart. Tylee was found in the Daybell Pet Cemetery, in a spot where Chad told the neighbors he had shot and buried a raccoon. JJ's body was found wrapped in duct tape. Evidence indicates that he may have been buried while still alive. Why were Tylee and JJ, 2 beloved and by all accounts good kids, murdered? The answer is found in the affidavit for Chad Daybell's arrest in June of 2020. According to that document, Chad's religious beliefs include the idea that some people on this earth are zombies, and that when Lori said her children have become zombies, she wasn't speaking about the moodiness and changes that come over all teenagers. She was talking about something much, much darker. But did Chad and Lori actually kill the kids, or did they send someone else to do it? Lori's ever-loyal brother Alex Cox was in Chad's yard on 2 separate nights that Tylee and JJ disappeared. Cell phone records place him there both times and in the middle of the night. At this point, we would love to tell you that Alex Cox spilled the beans and confessed all the details of the plot. But remember that 911 call from the beginning of the story. When the bodies of Tylee and JJ were discovered, Alex Cox was already dead.
Okay, what is your emergency?
I have a older male here named Alex. He just passed out there on the bathroom.
he awake right now?
I think he's passed out.
Okay, you think he's unconscious?
Yeah.
Authorities are relatively certain that Alex's death was natural, but they haven't stopped looking at the case. And you can't blame them. His corpse is just the latest in a long line left behind Lori and Chad. Lori's third husband, Joseph Ryan, was beaten by her brother Alex and later died, apparently of natural causes. Lori's fourth husband, Charles, was shot twice by Alex, supposedly in self-defense. Chad's wife, Tammy, died in her bed, but not until after she had been shot at and Chad had bought a wedding ring for his new wife. Tylee and JJ, the brother and sister who couldn't bear to be separated, were buried together in Chad's backyard. That makes Alex Cox, Lori's brother, the sixth person to conveniently die in this story. With him, he takes away any chance we might have of proving the involvement of Lori and Chad in the deaths of the two children. Without Alex Cox, there is no way to prove that Lori and Chad participated or ordered the deaths of JJ and Tylee. However, both are currently defending themselves on charges of conspiracy to conceal evidence. Their case has been pushed back to at least the fall of 2021. That's where Beyond Crime leaves you for now. An unsatisfying ending to a grisly tale. There are still as many questions as there are answers.